Sorry, is this a metrics meeting?
Sorry?
Sorry, is this a metrics meeting? It might be in the wrong.
This is the Ruby SIG.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Please, thank you.
What's happening?
Hey, Eric.
Long time no see. Cat. Matt has a cat. They could be friends.
I do. My cats are not around right now. That's why the door is shut right now. But
They don't have to be friends. It's a suggestion. You're on mute, but yeah. They could.
I feel like everyone's video seems laggy, which makes me wonder if it's my computer that's actually got the lag.
I think I'm just talking over people. As one does.
Yeah, it can happen, especially in Zoom.
Yeah. Matt, could you summarize for me in like a minute what this whole are you familiar with the OTLP arrow stuff that's ongoing with there's like a proposal for OTLP columnar encoding support that appears related to one schema URL. I was trying to look into schema URL stuff. But it looks like Josh and some folks from your organization, some folks from F5 have this larger upstream OTEP about basically making, let me see if I can find it, columnar encoding for basically making a general encoding format for an open telemetry backend. And I was wondering, and it's incredibly my eyes are bleeding trying to digest it. But it seems like Lightstep has some sort of interest in it. So I was wondering if you're familiar with it or what's the general overall thing. But if not, I don't want to put you on the spot.
You are putting me on the spot. But yeah, so I don't know that I can add a lot of color to it other than I can read through this and talk to Josh a little bit and try to get some sort of reasonable summary together for next week, perhaps.
It would be good to know it seems like it has lots of benefits and has also lots of impact on yeah, I don't know, OTLP in general. So I'm just kind of trying to scope out whether this is some random guy from F5 being like, ooh, this is a good idea. And by the way, I'm one person with 10% of my time working on it, or if it's there was some sort of conversation and agreement between organizations being oh, this is a proposal that we're interested in pushing. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm just, yeah, I was kind of doing some late night reading last night.
You take your time, don't
But
worry.
yeah, next week or whatever. Or if you have a easier way to summarize it that isn't 5,000, words of text, it would be, I certainly got a little lost. So any help is appreciated.
Cool. Yeah, I'll try to get some some background knowledge on that. It does look interesting. At a glance, it just looks like it's some way to kind of make the protocol as compact as possible without, minimize how much you're kind of repeating data, etc. But
Yeah.
That's just at a glance.
All right, no worries.
Cool. So I think most people are here. Go ahead and share a screen, go through the spec sig, and then
Before you get started, also, I've been speaking a little bit with Amy Toby, who I think's made some contributions here. She's the author of like Otel CLI, which I know Andrew Hayworth has contributed on. And I think she's interested in joining the SIG more frequently, but has bad timing things. But I told her to come hang out sometime and see if there's any issues. But so if you guys know, see anything low hanging going forward, we might have some other folks interested in contributing soon. So that could be good. Sorry. And anyway, that's all I got.
cool. Yeah. The more the merrier. All right, so there's an OTLP V011 release candidate. It would have the exponential histogram, but I think one of the big blockers to this is optionals, which we talked about last week. So this is something that needs to be figured out. It seems like it's a probably long-term project for the collector. So probability sampling there, I guess the OTEPs were merged, but now kind of the blocker is that there were kind of two proposals in how to propagate information between services. One was using W3C trace state. It's the thing that's available to us today to use, but there has been some discussion at the W3C distributed tracing working group about modifying the trace parent to be able to pass a sampling probability there. So I think given that the W3C hasn't completely said no, go away with this proposal, I think there is some interest in trying to see if they would be interested in adopting this. So there are two PRs there. I think they are both, they are both kind of potential ways forward. Does not directly compete with, but is overlapping with 467. So these are kind of the two open issues there. So I don't know, it's encouraging that the W3C hasn't completely said no to this stuff, but I wouldn't hold my breath on it actually getting passed through anytime soon. But it certainly would be nice. It would be much easier to do this in trace parent rather than trace state. In the schema file, the things that we're calling attributes, now both on metrics and spans, I think were called labels. So Tigran is just asking, the OTEP says labels, do we have to stick to labels or can we rename to attributes? I think the discussion was the OTEPs aren't kind of written in stone. It's kind of like once you actually get it to the spec repo, that's when the decision really needs to be final. So it would be okay to make that change. let's see, there are some semantic conventions that some semantic convention PRs that need some eyes on them. One is about K8's semantic conventions, and another is about Apache Rocket MQ. Similarly, there are semantic conventions for file attributes. I don't know why, but they were talking, like, I feel like this stuff is fine, having this as just a flattened dotted key with a value. But the discussion went towards like creating a file type that is itself like a structured data. I don't know how backends would deal with a proliferation of these types, but I think ultimately it would end up just having to flatten this stuff again. I think we had this discussion, we had similar discussions when like Otlp technically allows you to have values that are maps, where the values themselves can be maps. And right now, like the only thing that is kind of preventing that from getting out of control is like the tracing spec is like, just don't use this. But I feel like, yeah, I feel like not a lot of people remember those discussions, and I fear that just don't use this verbiage in the spec will disappear someday, and we will be we'll be back to where we started. So I don't know what to say about that, but that's that. Another thing that we spent some time on was talking about retries for Otlp. Essentially, the conversation was there's not enough, the specs do not say enough about retries for anybody to really implement them. Apparently, there's gRPC retry, which I think is pretty straightforward, and there was not a lot of disagreement about using that, but this discussion basically exploded into, we probably need a retry sig to hash everything out, because I think discussions were like, you know, for requests that are successful, that's pretty straightforward. For requests that fail, that's pretty straightforward. But there's like this whole gray area where like you can have partially successful requests, and that's where things fall apart. So I don't know. Jack was trying to be, yeah, probably sidebar conversations equal new sig, but yeah, I think Jack was trying to at least be pragmatic and be like, all right, maybe we can spec the things that we know about, and then the successful requests and the failed requests, and then we can leave the gray area gray and just mention that it's unspecified at this time. So I think they are trying to make some kind of a progress here, but I suppose whatever they do, we probably need to keep an eye on this just to make sure that our exporters are doing the right thing, since we're not gRPC based. And then the other like flashback was error handling and open telemetry. I feel like we spent like 3 to 6 months of the early days of the Ruby SIG just like tearing our hair out about like how to kind of do things properly. And I think so this is ultimately about the SDKs and APIs, like what happens, especially like in a dynamic language when you pass garbage parameters in. And I think kind of the core principle that Tigran was laying out, which I agree with in principle, is that if you're using the NoOp API and you hand some data to it, and then if you hand that same data to something backed by an SDK, like you should not get an exception. If there's no exception from the API, there should be no exception from the SDK. I think the devil is in the details, and there are just a lot of ways that you can mess this up in a dynamic language. So the conversation went all over the place. Somebody was talking about a strict mode. It's just, I don't know, like everything that we've kind of talked about in the past has resurfaced in this conversation. I don't know, it was causing so much emotion for me. I don't know that I exactly have like the takeaway, and I don't know if there was a takeaway that said run up to the end of the meeting. The thing that definitely exists is there's a survey, so perhaps there's a survey to figure out how this actually works already, but if we want to fill this out, we should just add Ruby and just kind of document what we do. And I think by documenting what different languages do, that will help influence the outcome of all of this. But yeah, I think the key takeaways and key things, I guess, to summarize these previous like arguments that we've had is that I guess it's hard to ensure that whatever you pass to the NoOp implementation is going to work when you plug in an SDK without adding like a bunch of runtime checks into the NoOp implementation. And it just seems, and that in general there are performance concerns. Those kind of end up being a waste of resources over time, and there's no way to kind of reclaim it, I guess. It's like ideally you would want some kind of static analysis to figure this stuff out. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of like hand waved when we were talking about this, like maybe someday blah, blah, blah sorbet or Ruby will provide something, and we will adopt that. But yeah, I'm rambling, but then, there was kind of the discussion of like, well, a developer should be able to get feedback when they're doing something wrong right away. So that kind of led to strict mode, which I don't know, I feel like I pulled this thing up just to remind myself. And there we go. We were talking about it in October 2019. So this is open. We haven't closed it. All right. So it's still open. So that actually ended up being the end of the meeting. I don't know if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns. I saw a lot of smiling from Francis as we.
It's just like everything we punted early on in open telemetry is kind of coming back to haunt us, which I guess shouldn't be a surprise, but yeah, here we are.
Yeah, I guess, should we fill this out? Does anybody want to volunteer to fill this thing out, just so that we can have some kind of input as to what we're currently doing, and if we think what we're currently doing is a good approach or not?
Is what we're currently doing, as far as it, generally speaking, is like we basically just fail fast on most configure like things users can configure
We raise and then we call the error handler, and the error handler is configurable. We pass in something that clearly indicates it's a configuration error so that you can figure out whether you want to actually fail fast, or you just want to log and continue, or you just want to ignore it and continue. So that's for config errors. For kind of runtime checking, for runtime stuff, we're generally, for the most part, I think we're checking and then inserting a default. In some cases, we may call the error handler. We never just raise.
Right. After, like during runtime.
After configuration, yeah, we don't ever raise.
We have right now the default is essentially we raise, but then that by default sort of just gets logged as a config error. But you can modify that, right? If that's my that summarizes we okay. Do you want me to volunteer for this? I mean, I guess I can volunteer for this if the deadline's like next week or something. I can probably. I think we have a pretty simple explanation. So, given that I just got it from Francis, so I've been the only reason I'm volunteering is I've been touching a bunch of the config stuff anyway, so it's kind of top of mind. Where is Ruby on here? Oh, I guess we would have to put it in.
Yeah, so we would add it in. So I think on the other side of things, I think we do try to refrain from tons of like runtime checking, especially in kind of the API layer. And generally the strategy has been to, like, if you can kind of like provide some reasonable defaults and do the right thing. But I think in these situations where whatever you passed in did result in an error condition, we do try to just pipe that through the error handler. Is that?
Yeah, that sounds right. I'd have to go and revisit like all the particular error cases, but that sounds right to me.
Yeah, I am hand waving there, but I feel like that was kind of like our general approach, was to like try not to fail if you can do something sensible, but in the event that none of that works out, try not to raise.
Yeah, like the API is very thin and doesn't do much at all. So any error handling is deferred to the SDK. So the SDK implementation of span, for example. Yeah.
Sure. Should we make an issue and you can assign it to me? Or should we?
Sure, I think that makes sense. Might as well have an issue.
Yeah.
Tristan, if I can find the chat again. Tristan had to take off, but he put a note in the agenda document about how to move forward with a release announcement. And apparently there's a group announcement with JavaScript and Erlang. So we can join that group if we are interested. So
yeah, maybe Robert or has, I know he's been looking at this.
My opinion is, why not? And if that is the opinion of the group, yeah, we should probably just reach out to Tristan and see. Blog post announcement can be done by just sending a PR with the post to the website repo. If wanting a group post that are JavaScript and Erlang Elixir are also going GR on time.
Be cool if we did like part of a group post. I think that would be interesting. Like it's like just a bunch of language specs all hitting one point together. Like that'd be cool.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. So it sounds like reaching out to Daniel Dyla and Tristan to get a little bit more information is probably the right next step. Just, yeah, figure out what they need.
He's pretty active on CNCF Slack as well. If you, I'm sure he'll respond if you ping him.
Cool. All right. So I think that is all I have. Is there anything interesting from the instrumentation sig?
There may have been. I kind of got pulled away, unfortunately. Like so, I caught pieces and parts of it. I have this on my I'll link it here. Something that I need to read. It essentially, I think these meetings are a little bit unstructured at the moment, and they're trying to add structure to them. So like one of the things is like coming up with like a set of approvers and scoping things and like actually taking these conversations and turning them into something a little bit more tangible. Because like even if we reach consensus on a call on something, it's then what, right? Like a lot of this is just a bit nebulous. People are talking about different things they think are important, and we're trying to like focus it. So this is someone proposed like how we should get the HTTP semantic conventions to a stable state. Like this is like how we should get there basically. Other than that, I missed a good chunk partway through, but I caught a bit of the intro here. And so this is just, yeah, I don't know how much more I can share because I just realistically was distracted at that time, which kind of sucks. But those are like the big takeaways, is like pushing for some stability here. There was, I think this is the one, we're just linking the things that kind of were brought up here. Trying to push this through around certain guarantees around saying that something must be provided. So like, if you're going to be doing sampling decisions based off certain attributes for HTTP, then you need to provide them when you're creating them and not appending them later. So just ensuring that like the required attributes are present at the start. Yeah, those were like the big three things. We're just like coming up with how do we actually turn things into actionable items outside of the meetings, the scope for HTTP stuff, and then pushing that these HTTP attributes are required. And then there may have been other stuff I missed, unfortunately. Sorry, this is kind of a lousy update.
Cool. Yeah, I saw that. Or yeah, I know that last week Tristan seemed like he might have some opinions, but he also wasn't able to make it. So at least we have some visibility into what is going on there.
Yeah, I should be able to make today's, and I'll do a better job of capturing the discussion so I could bring it back next week.
Cool. All right. So moving on. Yeah, like we forgot to bring our party hats and kazoos and whatever those things are that unfurl when you blow on them. Do those have a name?
That's a great question. Yeah, what are those?
Yeah, it's the thing in the toot emoji, whatever that is.
Yes.
We didn't bring those, and yeah, I jumped right into the thing. But we should celebrate this 1.0 that only took 2 years to reach.
It's called a party popper.
Oh, party popper.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Not to be confused with a party pooper.
Correct. Because every party has a pooper.
Yeah, so congrats everybody.
Congrats.
Thanks everyone for all the hard work. It would not have been possible without everybody here and many people who are not here. So
So just trying to add some.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Everyone participated in different ways, and it's. I have something that I wanted to talk about just like really quickly in terms of our rack instrumentation. So we're seeing really high.
Did I lose his audio or is it just?
yeah, we're losing you, Robert.
Sorry,
You're back.
am I back now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, cool. I wanted to quickly just talk about the rack instrumentation. I'm gonna push up a change today. When we with rack with Rails will override the span name when it matches against a controller. But if it doesn't, we're getting really high cardinality spans, and the spec says that we shouldn't be doing that. And I did like a really quick scan of like JS and Go, and they're not overly consistent between the two. Like Go, for example, what they'll do is they'll set the header open. They'll set it to like HTTP method no route matched. They'll set that as the span name. Whereas I think JS, I don't have the tabs open now. I don't know where they went. They will just put like unmatched, I think. So it's like, I'm wondering what we should do there. Like what do we want to like copy there, because it's not actually spec'd out. I was thinking of just taking the Go approach, even if it is a little bit wordy, but just doing like HTTP method name and then route not matched or something like that, or unmatched route or route not found, and setting that as the default span name. You can always override it with like your Rails instrumentation. I think probably should have like a hash there for a config option to say like, I just want to use the URL name. Does anybody have any strong feelings there?
I just need clarification. So the problem, this would be changes to the Rails on instrumentation, not to the rack on instrumentation.
No, this would be rack. So it'd be changing the default rack span name, because the spec says that we should not be defaulting to the URL because it's too high cardinality. So we're actually not compliant at the moment.
Okay, so instead of putting the URL in, so for the URL quantization function that gets injected, right now we were saying that we would be changing the default the default method name to be, the default span name to be what again?
Sorry. Like HTTP get route not matched.
Route not matched, but that's because the rack middleware is aware of the fact that the route wasn't matched.
Well, the idea is that the higher level should match it. Like, I guess we have to decide, like, that's like, I think why I want to bring this up is that if you submit like a quantization method to it, it'll use that first. If you say use like this full URL, because that should be, I think, a config option, this doesn't exist, and then the default fallback is like if nothing renames the span name, if we're not able to quantize that URL or you don't have it set up, it should not use the high cardinality URL name as a default behavior.
So we'll be keeping track of the before and after what the span name used to be in the rack middleware itself. And then saying if that hasn't changed, then we set it to, whatever. And this is helpful in cases where some bot is like scraping your site and you're trying to hit random things and the route's not really found, right? And it just like reduces that cardinality, or like, basically like nothing itself is translating that span name.
Right. So yeah, it's really just a means of controlling the cardinality. Like we can see some apps and they get hit by those like security scanners constantly. So like the operations list cardinality is like through the roof. Like it's crazy.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we look at like OpenTelemetry Go's, the Gorilla instrumentation there, if it can't match it, it literally just says like here HTTP method route not found. And the JS stuff was doing similar. I don't have the link for that right now, but it did look very similar. See if I can pull it up.
But in a case where like you're not using an additional auto instrumentation, where you only have a rack app and you don't have anything auto instrumented beneath it, then every route will appear as route not found because it wasn't handled. So like I would lean towards more having, personally speaking, lean towards having the span name be named like the HTTP method maybe. With, because like, we end up having a bunch of things that are saying as not found just because something else didn't overwrite it for some reason.
Yeah, and I think that's also more consistent with the language in the spec. I mean, the language in the spec is mostly talking about client spans where you don't have enough information to determine the route. But in this case, that's also true. We don't have enough information to determine the route because it didn't route to anything meaningful. So just using HTTP method is most consistent with the spec.
Would this information be the Datadog defaults, which were not good or standardized in any way and generally hated by users everywhere, were some like, it was like method plus status code, some concatenation of that, which sort of summarizes or encapsulates, like if it's not found, or if it's like, just a rack app, you would get like get 200 versus like get 404, I don't think there's like great, I think the problem is that all the solutions are ultimately low value. So it's just about, I'm not picky, but I think it's important to add. And as far as like, I would love to see a quantiz, but I'm not picky, but I agree it's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we have the quantization support there. Like there's a support for a quantization function to be provided. At some point, somebody who's eager could go off and work on a decent quantization function that we could provide in, like the common package or something, right? It's just a utility thing that people can leverage, at least as an example. But I think the default should probably just be HTTP space method.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't want to segment like the status code responses probably. I don't know.
I mean, those are in a tag anyway, right? There's already an attribute for the response.
Yeah, it's weird.
Sounds good. It would be nice to see some sort of standardized quantization algorithm for these things exist cross language, but
I think you should create a SIG for that.
Oh my God, you beat me to the punch, Francis.
It would also be nice to see whatever, eBPF come and just replace all this, so whatever, anyway.
So then we're gonna say, like, I think people, if I picked up on the conversation right, like, are we comfortable with having the default be like HTTP method name?
Yep.
Okay. And then I think it's not unreasonable to surface a configuration option that says, like, I would like to continue having the full URL as my name. Like, do you think it's reasonable to give that functionality to users?
Isn't that just like letting them override the URL quantization and return the URL?
Yes, it's exactly
Yeah.
that.
Maybe we could documentation probably can go a long way here.
Yeah,
Just
Okay.
so that-
I wouldn't
if you
necessarily add an extra option, because then it just becomes this weird backwards compatibility thing. Instead, just document, here's how you enable the existing behavior using the existing configuration option.
Right. So just the URL quantization that does nothing.
It just returns the
Yeah.
value of passed in. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for your patience, Robert.
Yeah, I think HTTP verb name makes sense. I don't know how relevant this issue is, but I think this seems to assume that you have a low cardinality path for a lot of these. So I don't know that this exploration, I don't know how complete this exploration was to figure out how things work in some other more edge case scenarios. But yeah, I believe that that HTTP verb was a very common name, at least in open tracing for HTTP fans. So there is some precedent there. Cool. Anything else we should talk about?
There's small stuff. I've been poking around at that. There's the guy, Chris, who's contributed that really useful like high query params config option, and it's sort of ballooned into like, well, let's add a bunch of awesome stuff like, oh, like it sparked a lot of conversation about like this should be supported. I'm realizing it's starting to kind of spiral into the scope is starting to grow, and I have this work in progress PR for add instrumentation helpers gem that encapsulates both sort of some HTTP client helpers, but also some helpers around instrumentation option inheritance. I think it's starting to get to a point where I would prefer to reduce the scope of it to just basically ship the HTTP request attribute helpers, which would allow the end user who made the original PR to start using the high query params feature, and then open a new issue, a new PR with some broader changes to handling configuration options, which might include adding more instrumentation helpers, but yeah, I don't, it's been open forever, and I realized that it's starting to get in the way of the original purpose of the user's PR. So that's one thing I wanted to mention is I'm probably, anyone who is reviewing that, I'm probably just going to cut out a bunch of the stuff and open a new PR, like separate it out into new PR, so it's a bit easier to manage. That was, yeah, that was the only thing. I did open another, having spoken with Robert and Tim and Francis and, internal meetings. I think we're looking into schema URL more. It's something on our plate to maybe specify a little more clearly what that implementation would require in Ruby. It seems like it's a little, although the OTEP was merged, the actual use is a little bit fluid still, and the only implementation is in Go, and but it seems like there's still some missing parts around like the appropriate way to maybe parse some of these schema URLs, But just, I added a sort of, I thought I did. Is there?
Yeah, there
Oh,
was
I'm
a
sorry. We're
notification.
okay. We're in the issues, not the PRs. I added a placeholder issue to kind of track that work. It seems to be pretty low for Ruby. It's actually a little bit unclear to me whether the OTEP or whether this work means just add this sort of like attribute to the protos and the, you know, so have spans emitting with the schema URLs and attribute or resources, or whether it also means adding the functionality that schema URL enables, which is having this automatic translation to exporters essentially. Which it,
Yeah,
like it might.
my original understanding was that the only work that would be required for us is to add the schema URL as a configuration parameter with an appropriate default, and then we would make sure that that's added to, I think, the resource, maybe.
Instrumentation spans, I think, is in the it gets it. And yeah, there's a few places. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm not clear on whether there's any other work in the SDK that's supposed to build on that, or if it's really enabling things downstream in the collector.
Yeah, it seems like they're kind of prototyping. Wow, like they're kind of doing it. Tigran is working on within OpenTelemetry Go sort of iteratively to sort of prototype some stuff out, which may affect what the ultimate specification looks like. But we can, I think, do it incrementally where the lowest hanging fruit is just adding this stuff to as a easy config optional config, and you know, having it emitted in telemetry, which can be ignored. And then if it's required, we can add this. You know, it seems like it probably shouldn't be required to add all this translation stuff to an exporter, but they look like they're attempting to do that in OpenTelemetry Go because they don't necessarily want to depend on a collector with it to make use of the functionality, which makes sense given that not every vendor wants or requires a collector. But anyway, so it's just on, I just opened up a tracking issue and I'll probably have some related PRs in the coming weeks. There's still lots of open questions around the feature itself, but it seems pretty cool. And I think it could make life easier for us if we do decide to start, you know, if stuff starts getting breaking changes in the future between, I don't know, if they change exception to, you know, exception.name to be exception.error name or something. Like if they start changing attribute meanings and stuff, it's easier to track it and manage it. Cool. That was the only other thing. I don't necessarily have open questions, but if anyone has thoughts on this, you know, let me know, or comment on the PR, or let me know what your requirements are for it, because I'll probably start pushing stuff up.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to get an update at some point to it once you figure out exactly what needs to be done, like if there does need to be translation in process, and if that's kind of like an optional thing where you would kind of do it either in process through configuration or kind of have like the equivalent thing in a collector that does that.
There's like right now, there's an issue to add that processor in the collector. And I think what they're doing is, I think the blocker right now is maybe merge it. There's some open questions around how you merge all the different translations, because there's different subcategories, some of them overlap with each other. And then there's also open questions around like, well, what if you want to do schemas based on a parent schema? So it's like a superset type schema. How do you merge those things? And so, but I guess by doing it in Go, you get the benefits of getting the work kind of for free in the collector. So anyway, cool. Yeah, I'll try to keep everyone updated on if suddenly a requirement comes down to us that we have to implement this in a processor and exporter in process, which would suck, but whatever.
Yeah, that reminds me that our processors are still super hard to use if you want to modify anything on the way through. which is another can I believe we're kicking down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's being kicked down the road primarily because the spec is very clear that once you finalize that span and turn it into span data, like the span itself can't be modified, right? We have to turn it into span data, and then, you know, presumably the span data can be modified, but yeah, you can't just like mutate the span after it's ended.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to.
I think there's also a problem in that span processes process spans, not span data, right? So it's really just that final one that produces, like turns it into span data and emits it to the exporter. So most of the use cases for span processes are assumed to be, you know, some kind of batching mechanism or just simply passing it on. But the reality is that you want to mutate. So if you want to do the mutation, it really has to be on the span data, but that's really defined as an exporter rather than a processor. So yeah, terminology is hard, or naming things is hard. Maybe we need a span data processor.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we need. It goes after the span processor, and you can get your hands on a span data and do whatever you need to it. But
we need higher level span data processors as well. Span data processor, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Span data processor providers, we need it all.
Yeah, as long as they're abstract factories or something. Yeah, anyway. Cool. Anything else we want to chat about?
I think maybe like the last thing, I'll just like throw it out there, the active support stuff that Tim's been working on. We're about to merge his open PR. I'm just gonna get him to add some comments. So we know there's actually still an issue. So there's different ways you can subscribe your notifications. So like you can do the instrument that you just like pass in the block. That works fine. You can have like the complex notification subscription where you explicitly define your start and finish methods. If the finish method breaks, yeah, so you can see it right there is the example of where it breaks. If you have the subscriber and it breaks in the start, your finish will never get called on your span subscriber. So it doesn't matter in what order things are in. If it blows up there, it blows up the whole life cycle of like calling finish on all the other instrumentations. So there's still a hole here where it doesn't work. This issue existed in the previous implementation with the custom fan out as well. So right now, I think this change is still an incremental step in the right direction. Ultimately, I think we're just running into the fact that active support notifications are as reliable as we originally thought they were, and that they are not. But yeah, this is like our next step. Once this gets brought in, he'll continue on like splitting it out into its own gem so people can use it at their own discretion. We're gonna talk to some of the internal Rails people that we have at Shopify to see if they have any ideas of what we can do here. But this just solidifies that like I'm going to continue avoiding using active support notifications for instrumentation where possible or entirely. So it's kind of the grim update on that work. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that misery or any comments or words of encouragement.
Does anything in Beeline help? In the Beeline implementation, did they figure anything out?
In the what implementation?
This is
Sorry.
Honeycomb's Beeline library.
Yeah, is there anything in there? Maybe they figured something out.
We can take a look, but I don't think so. I think this is just kind of an unsolved problem.
Mystery, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a mystery. We know the behavior. It's just not the behavior we want, right?
Poor choice of words on my part. It's kind of like the crime. Sorry, it's still poor choice of words. We all knew this was a problem. We just did the work and proved even more that it was a problem.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, after you. All right, yeah. The only thing I was going to say is if we are able to come up with some sort of like solution with Rails core people, if there's some clever way out of this that can be added to Rails, future Rails, we could always consider monkey patching past Rails to kind of have that behavior, and that might be one escape hatch. It's my only optimistic comment on this, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's just it just becomes a little bit uncomfortable with how invasive it gets if we take that approach. Like, because like then it's we do that, we have to make sure that it's very transparent that we're doing that, because what if some application somewhere is relying on the fact that when an instrumentation or active support notification blows up, all the other ones don't run. I'm sure there is an app out there that depends on that behavior, unfortunately. So like, it just, yeah, it's unfortunate that this is like the recommended way of getting instrumentation into Rails. It really sucks.
I think I was just going to say, I think we need to work on getting like first party open telemetry instrumentation into Rails. That's really the only path forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. So there may be an internal initiative to get more people committing to Rails. So maybe this will be our end.
I was going to say schema URL is supposed to help with first party instrumentation, although it's unclear how. But it's like we could also always offer. New Relic did this years ago, like a dual option for like, here's how you tell us how you want to patch your stuff. You can have this super invasive approach, or use ASN and use this and let people toggle. Not perfect, but kind of at least give people the menu of choices. It's also a bunch of code we'll have to maintain then, because we're maintaining twice the code, but that's another way. If we're terrified of if we're worried about the edge cases, we could always just keep that the simpler way as an offering and leave it off by default or something.
I think it like solves the issue of discarding the active support notifications. So that's a step in the right direction. I think it keeps them. So that's good. Yeah, I'll try to reach out, as Robert mentioned, to the internal Rails folks and try to summarize it in an issue. Yeah, let you guys know how it goes.
Cool, sounds good. Looks like we're at time. Is there any last items? Great. Well, see everybody around. I think, yeah, we should definitely reach out to get in on this group 1.0 announcement. But other than that,
I will throw something out there. Something weird is going on where after I upgraded to 1.0 and upgraded NetHTTP and the exporter gems in one of our apps, for whatever reason, it's generating spans for the exporter calls sometimes. And those should be untraced. And I can't reproduce the problem outside of the application. So I'm in this weird state right now where I'm like gonna have to debug Docker Hell or whatever to figure out what's going on. But I'll get back to you all on it. Have you all seen anything like that at all?
I used to see it all the time at Datadog because we had a bad way of doing untracing. Short term try to drop them where you can, and like if there's ways you can filter. But no, I looked at the commit. I didn't see any changes super recently related to anything involved. So I was like, nothing stood out to me, but I haven't attempted to reproduce.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a problem that like that NetHTTP object instance is getting initialized and it's not receiving the prepend. But then I was
Right.
like, no, that's stupid because it is generating the span. It's just that the untraced parent context, essentially that the somehow maybe the parent context is not being treated as untraced for some reason. And so I'm really confused.
Right. It's like NetHTTP is getting the instances outside of the untraced block, but the dot post request is within the untraced block. You're saying like, yeah.
You're
Let me
using
know.
the OTLP exporter, right?
That's right. We provided, I figured, I was like, what could it be? We use our own metrics reporter implementation. Are we initializing that class out of order? But I'm like, no, none of those things make sense because if it was like a initialization problem, then the instrumentation wouldn't be mixed in at all, right? I have the opposite problem, which is that somehow InSpan, the context that InSpan is using, thinks the current span is a recording span. It is not receiving the non-recording span.
Are you using
at
a
the
custom?
time. No, I'm using a custom metrics reporter, but everything else is part of is default.
I wonder if batch
Right.
span processor has some issues with not exporting, with accidentally exporting non-recording spans. That's the only thing. We're over time, but I don't.
We are.
Yeah. I don't have. I don't have good ideas, but I believe you, if that makes you feel better.
Well, I have
So it's
screenshots.
tricky because we trace it. We do intentionally trace ours. So that's like why it's a little bit tricky for us to like, we don't have experience because we have been doing it intentionally.
Yeah,
But
now
I'm
we want
wondering
to
if it-
intentionally not trace it. So maybe we can intentionally not trace it and see if it breaks in the same way for us.
Yeah, I definitely can do that. I'm wondering if it has something to do with the retry behavior and maybe some context leaking and remaining set somehow. I don't know.
Wait,
But
Robert, you're intentionally tracing it because you're providing your own implementation of.
No, we wanted to
The
trace
OTLP?
the export pipeline so that we could actually trace the export call and then the collector, trace it all the way to the collector, basically.
Okay.
So we've disabled that. Like we haven't gotten that whole chain working properly yet. So we're in the process of disabling it. I don't think we've disabled it yet at the exporter, but we want to. So.
yeah, maybe we'll see it. But I was just wondering if maybe it's something around retry when it fails and retries. Maybe it's doing something peculiar to there. But I don't know. We'll look at it too because like I can actually get that going today and have us stop tracing it and then see if we start seeing these kind of leaky traces coming out.
Sorry. Does anybody have more time to stick around, or everybody gonna go?
I have a few minutes that I
You got
can.
a few minutes? Okay, so I'm just gonna look right here at some of this code together. Is that all right?
Sure.
So looking at a round request, this is setting that to untraced explicitly, correct? Right? Like this should just work the way that it.
I cannot see your screen, by the way.
You are not able to see my screen.
It is.
There you
Oh,
go.
there it can. Now we can.
Perhaps it's everything's slow. So a round request, right, which occurs here at line 149.
Mhm.
Right. This is specifically the entire block.
Correct.
And so if there's any retries or anything that happens with these backoffs or whatever, but that around request is being wrapped here by this untraced on this on the common utility.
Right.
And untraced is setting a non-recording span for the span context, correct?
Mhm.
So that should never. And so I'm wondering, I got a little bit. I was a little confused when you said you were looking at enabling tracing for this pipeline for y'all.
So
you
what
can
we
trace
do
it.
is we hook into the around request. So we inherit from the OTLP exporter, and then we
Yeah,
explicitly trace it.
understood. So you're overriding a round request in your applications so you can trace that. Understood. Okay. But everything here would lead me to believe that this should always have a non-recording span for a parent context.
Right. That's the intention.
And so the only thing that I can think of, and so when I look at, say, like the trace output, right? So this is the Lightstep trace output, unless I'm misunderstanding this, right? This is trying to hit, so the Lightstep satellite, which is effectively like their collector, right? This has a different URL for the HTTP target. And this is our host names. There was nothing in here that I saw that I felt like was unusual. But I did see that we're getting a parent ID. So there is a parent span ID and a parent trace ID at the time that this code is running. And so I don't understand how that would be possible unless something was weird with the thread context.
Does the span ID, does the parent span ID actually make it to the back end? Like, can you find it? It obviously doesn't, right? Because you're just
not.
looking.
Yeah, it does not, which is
So
unusual.
that is suggesting maybe there's a difference in sampling, because the samplers could choose, like the samplers, like if I'm not mistaken, the always sampler isn't going to honor whatever the parent's doing. So there's a possibility that if you're just using an always sampler, it's always going to produce a recording span. Because we're explicitly saying non-recording span, this one won't be exported, but its children might be.
That's a good point. So I can check to see if this app has always on for its sampling, forcing that to produce. And that's something good to know. So I would have assumed that the untraced would override that sampling logic downstream. And it doesn't.
It's one of the weaknesses of this approach of untracing, as opposed to some of the ones that were being proposed by JavaScript, I think. Like if you're using this special mechanism in the context that allows you to say, like, untrace everything from this point on, then it's more robust. This doesn't require any changes to the context API, but it is prone to problems if you're using like an always sampler that ignores the parent.
Okay, I'm gonna make a note to myself in this issue. Thanks, I appreciate this debugging session, y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let us know how it works out.
Okay, how do you normally end your Shopify stand-up meetings?
We don't have them. We don't have stand-up meetings. We just awkwardly wave at each other as people hang up at different times.
I just get. I feel like I'm at Shopify stand-ups. This is like 90% of y'all.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for everything, y'all. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.